In this video, we're going to make the counter count down and we're going to add some other things like the reset function or reset method. In this video, I will be continuing the RL from scratch in Python series where I implement a reinforcement learning agent in Python and train it using deep Q learning. So as you saw in the beginning, we'll be making the countdown timer actually count and we'll be implementing the reset function for the environment. So to make the countdown timer actually count, we want it to be running independent of whatever functions we're calling in the main um, thread. So for that, we're going to be using the threading module, which is core Python. So we're going to import threading. So this will allow us to run a separate thread in the, basically it's going to run by itself and it'll keep updating the countdown timer. It doesn't matter what we're doing here or what functions we're calling, it will keep updating the countdown timer every second. So for that, first what we have to do is we'll define the countdown color. So we will replace all these constants here. So we'll say self dot countdown. We'll say the color is color dot black, and then so that's when it's like from 15 to 1. When it gets to 0, that's when it ends. So we're going to say self dot timeout color, because when it gets to 0 it will time out. So timeout color will be color dot red, and then we're going to say the countdown height. The height of the countdown timer will be 10. Basically we're just going to replace this, and then the self dot countdown, the countdown width or depth will be 2, and then we're going to replace these here. So instead of color dot black, since it's going to start at 15 or whatever you say countdown start is, since it's not going to be timed out, so we're going to say self dot countdown color, and then the height will be self dot countdown height, and the depth will be self dot countdown depth. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a new thread using the threading module. So we're going to create an update function. So we're going to say def update countdown. So what this will do, it'll basically every second it will update. So for now we'll just say pass. And what we'll do is we'll create a new thread. So we'll say self dot countdown updater, which is the new thread. That is going to be threading dot thread. And then the target, which basically which function is it going to execute in this new thread, that will be update countdown. Or it will be self.update because it's a class. And then we're going to say daemon equals true. So if we end this process, if we end this main thread, it will end this also. And then in this update countdown function, we're going to say for I in range, we're going to say self.countdown start. So basically that many seconds. So if we were to just import time, and if we were to say time.sleep 1. So if we were to say time.sleep, if we sleep for 1 second, and then we say, since the countdown text here, you can't change it, it's not dynamic. So what we're going to do, we're just going to say self dot countdown text dot visible. So we're going to say that's false, so you can't see it. And then we're going to define a new text object, which is going to have the same name. So self dot countdown text equals text. Basically, we're just going to copy this, but we're going to change it a bit. So this text will be again a string, but this time we're also going to define the This time we're going to define the time. So for a time, we're going to just say countdown text. That will be, so that'll be a string of the self dot countdown start, and we're going to subtract I because it's counting down. And since I is not going to get to countdown start, it's going to get to countdown start -1. But we want the text actually hit 0, so we're going to say -1 again. And then we're going to say the text here equals countdown text. The position is self dot countdown text position. And the color we're going to define here. We're going to say after this part, we're going to say the color equals self dot countdown color if countdown text is not equal to a string 0. So basically, if the countdown text isn't 0, then we're going to use countdown color. Otherwise, we're going to use self dot timeout color, which we've set to red. So once it hits 0, it's going to turn red. Otherwise, it'll be black. And we're going to say color equals color. The height is self dot countdown height. The depth is self dot countdown depth. So now if I were to run the script in test.py, now what it would do is it would say first we have to actually call this function. So after setting all this up, we're just going to comment this threading out for now. We're going to say self dot update countdown. And what this will do, it will call this function which will keep updating the countdown text. And then we're going to say test.py. As you can see, it is our test.py file. Then to run the script, we're going to say python test.py. And then when we run that, it will create, and it should start, yeah, it's counting down. So right now it's counting down, but what's happening is since it's running in the main thread, we can't call any other functions. So if I were to add a new function here, if I were to say def test, so if I were to create a testing function, and if I were to print this is a test, and if I call this function after self.update countdown, if I say self.test, it's not going to execute. So you can see here, we've loaded the Chrome window, but it's not executing because it's basically blocking the rest of the thread or the rest of the thread. So we have to put this in a separate thread, which is what we're going to do here. So the countdown updater is a threading.thread object. The target is this. So now when we say self dot countdown updater, if we say start, then it should do the same thing. It's doing the exact same thing, but since it's in a different thread, now if I were to uncomment this test, it will also execute this function since it's in a different thread. You can see it's printed this is a test. So even though we're updating the counter, you can see we're updating here. Even though we're counting down and updating the counter, it's still going to execute whatever other functions or statements that we have in the main thread since it's in a different thread. So that's it for making the countdown actually count down. But we want to include a reset function for our environment. So we don't have to keep creating a new object. So what we can do is we can just delete this test. So to actually implement the reset function, we're going to say def reset. And then we're just going to pass for now. And then what I'm going to do is before we start the thread, I'm going to create a new object. We're going to say self.reset threads because we might have multiple threads here. So we're going to create one object for resetting all the threads when we call this reset function. So that is going to be threading dot event. And what we're going to do is here, instead of sleeping one, because it's a blocking call, even in this thread, we can't check for other statements while we're sleeping. So instead of this, what we'll do is we'll say for I in range, we'll say first at the beginning stop equals false. And then here we'll say the start time. So basically the current time right now, while we're starting this new iteration, that'll be time dot monotonic. And then we'll create a while true loop. And we'll say now equals time dot monotonic again. And we'll say if now minus start time is greater than 1. Basically, this is again, if it's been more than 1 second since we last updated, we're first going to break. We're going to break out of this while loop. So this should do the exact same thing. So it's a different way of implementing time not sleep. So you can see here, we're still updating the counter. So if it's greater than 1, so the last time we updated the counter is a start time, and we stay in this while true loop until the current time minus the start time is greater than 1 second. So at least 1 second has passed. Then we break, and then we come to this stuff here, which will update the counter, and then we loop over again and reset the start time. And then, but let's say this thread is running. While this thread is running, if we call a reset, then what will happen is you can't this thread will still continue running because you can't really say thread dot stop or something like that. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a reset threads event. So we're going to say here in this while true loop, after defining now, we're going to say if self dot reset threads dot is set. Basically, it's kind of like a flag. So if the flag is set, that means we want to reset this thread. So we'll first say break. So that will break out of this while true loop, but it'll still update this. It'll still update here, and it'll continue back to the next iteration of this for loop. But we want to break out of that too because we want to reset the entire thread. That's why we have the stop equals false. So before breaking out here, we can say stop equals true. And then over here in the for loop, we can say over here, we can say in the for loop, we can say if stop, then we're going to return. So it will get out of this for loop and get out of the function. It will just return. And then in the reset, what we can do is we can first say self dot reset threads. We're going to we're not going to say we're going to say set. So we're basically setting the flag. So when we set the flag, it will also update here. So reset threads. If it is set, then we'll break out of here and we'll basically exit this thread. And then we're going to say countdown text or self dot countdown text equals no, we're going to say countdown text dot visible equals false. Basically the same thing we're doing here, but we're resetting it basically. Whatever we're doing here, but we're resetting it. So it's going to be false. And then we're going to say the countdown text. The countdown text equals text. The text is a string self dot countdown start. And then the position is self dot countdown text position. The color is self dot countdown color because again we're starting at whatever countdown start is. And then the height is countdown height, and then the depth is self dot countdown depth. So we've just recreated the object. And then we're going to self dot reset threads is clear dot clear. So this will clear the flag so that we stop this current thread that we're running right now, and then we create a new instance because you can't just say thread dot restart. So it can only run once in the threading module. Each thread can only run once. So after this, we have to create we have to first clear this flag. So even if we create a new threading instance or a thread object, then even if we create that and reset thread is set, it will still immediately exit out. So we have to first clear the flag. So if we create a new object, it won't immediately exit. So then we'll say self dot countdown updater. We're going to say that's another threading dot thread. And then the target is again self dot update countdown daemon is true. And then we're going to start. We're going to start this thread, and then that should be all. So right now, if we rerun the script, so we're updating in a new thread, like we were doing before. But now, if I were to call in test.py, if I were to say, like, let's say I equals 0, then we'll say I plus equals 1. And then before that, if I were to say before that, if I say if I modulus, like, let's say 100, so if that's equal to 0, what we'll do, we'll say environment dot reset. So every 100 iterations of this loop will reset the environment, or we'll say every 1000. We'll see how fast it is. So we'll say every 1000 we'll reset it. So sometimes you have to restart the terminal because it doesn't immediately exit when you do Control C. Doesn't immediately see the keyboard interrupt. So now you can see here, okay, it's too fast. So instead of that, we can say import time, and we can say now equals, or first over here we'll delete this. So now equals time dot time, and then we can say if so we'll name the start actually, and we'll say if now minus start, or we have to define now. So if time dot time, basically if the current time minus the start time is greater than, let's say, 5 seconds, so we'll reset our environment. So every 5 seconds, it should go back to 15. So it'll go 15, it'll go 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, and then it'll reset to 15. Yeah, you can see here, before it went to 10, it actually reset. And then we have to also define here start equals time dot time. So that we'll say after 5 seconds, we'll reset start so that it will wait another 5 seconds. Otherwise, it'll just keep resetting. So now it will go to 15, it will start at 15, it will go to 10, and then reset to 15. Yeah, you can see it went to 10 just really fast. So that's the reset, but we still have something here. So if we want to know if we have timed out, we won't be knowing in this script. So we'll create a boolean variable here. We'll say self.timeout equals false. Here in the countdown after the countdown update dot start, we'll say timeout equals false, and here we'll say self dot timeout. So we'll say here self dot timeout in the update countdown function. So self dot timeout equals countdown text. So I'll explain this. Countdown text equal to 0 in a string. So basically what that's saying is if the countdown text is 0, so basically if we have timed out, if it is true, so then timeout will be true. If it is false, timeout will be false. That's what that means. And then in here we can just say we can skip all this, and then we can remove this too, and we can say we can just print environment dot timeout, and then we can first we'll sleep. Every second we'll print time environment dot timeout. So we'll say time dot sleep for 1 second, and then we'll print environment dot timeout. Basically, we'll check every second if we've timed out. So it'll be false for 15 seconds, because the start is 15 seconds and then it'll immediately go to true because we have timed up. So you can see it's false. And then when we get to zero, it will say true. You can see, yeah. So we said the timeout is true. So when the timeout is true, usually what we want to do, if we do timeout, we'll reset the environment. So it's environment dot reset if timeout is true. But when we reset the environment, you'll see here. So if environment dot timeout, we want to reset the environment. So if we just do this like right now how we're doing it. So if we do it like this, what you'll see is once we get to zero, it will reset the environment, but it will still be true. So timeout will still be true, well, even if we reset the environment. So we have to actually have to print timeout. We're going to print timeout here. So we have to print environment dot timeout. And then once it gets to zero, it's not actually going to reset the environment. I mean, it's going to reset the environment, but it's just going to keep printing true. You'll see why. So even after we reset it, so you can see there are actually multiple threads here. So what we have to do to fix whatever that is, we have to say in the reset environment, we have to say self dot timeout equals false. So that should do it. So once we run the script now, you'll see false and then you'll see it reset. So you saw here it's resetting. So since they didn't print it was true because we have to print this before doing this. Because if environment dot timeout, so if it is true, we'll reset it, but as soon as we reset it, it will be false. So if we keep printing it even after if we keep printing it after we reset, it'll be false no matter what. So now if you run this, yeah, you can see it's true now because it reset, it timed out, it went to zero, so now it's true. So now even if we call some other function, here if we define the test function again, and if we print this is a test. So even if we do that, and let's say, so in this case, I have to again close a terminal. So even if we print out and call it here, self dot test. So even if I call it here, it will still run. But I have to call it in the init function. And up here in the init, if we were to call after we set all this, even if when we start running this thread, if I were to say self dot test, it will still print this is a test because now it's the countdown is running in a different thread. So you can see once it loaded, so this actually loading it will take some time. So that is blocking, but after it loads, which is when everything starts, then it will execute this countdown in a different thread, but we can still call whatever functions we want in the main thread. So that's it for today. In the next video, we're going to implement the agent, and we might also implement a pressure plate. But that's it for today. Okay, bye.